for coming out on this cold night after quite a windy day, and the rain just started as I got in the car, so thanks for persevering and coming all the way out. And welcome to those online at home as well. Thank you for tuning in, and those watching later, thank you for catching up with us. I'm so excited tonight to have Dr. Emma Glanville with us to talk about this really interesting and important topic. I'll throw to Emma in a minute to introduce herself, but I thought I should just say we've established she's not related to Dr. Luke Glanville, who we interviewed last year. If your name is Glanville, your surname, watch out, you're next, whoever you are. But Emma is from our morning congregation now, although also has been at our afternoon congregation, so knows lots of us. And we're talking about what it is to live as a Christian with anxiety and what it is to be a Christian supporting friends and family with anxiety. How do we navigate this difficult issue and this increasingly important and increasingly difficult issue, and with an increase in either people talking about it or an increase in cases of it. It's always hard to know with these sorts of topics how much it's always been there and people haven't spoken about it, or whether numbers are increasing. But anyway, Emma will go into all of that. She's the expert, not me. And we've got some people here tonight who have graciously agreed to share with us about their experiences of living with anxiety as well. So Anjali and Joe have made some videos we'll show you, and then when we move to a question time, if it's appropriate, they will feel free to jump in and answer some questions that you have as well. So I might throw to you, Emma, to introduce yourself, and give your list of credentials.
This won't take long then. My name's Emma Glanville. I'm a psychiatrist. So that means I'm a doctor who's had some specialist training in mental health, and I work at the University of Canberra Hospital in mental health rehab. My area of expertise actually at work is not really anxiety, it's more schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder, but I chose to speak on this topic because I guess it's such a common problem. It's such a common problem that I see, and it's a problem that seems to be growing. And I think it's really helpful to just spend some time thinking about it and thinking about how we approach it as Christians, and also how we can support people, because everyone will know someone who's struggling with anxiety, because it's just such a common problem. I'm really grateful that we've had a couple of people who've been willing to share their experiences of anxiety, because I feel like it's one thing to talk about it from a theoretical perspective, and it's quite another thing to live with that burden. So I'm really grateful to Anjali and Joe who've put together a video for us, and then Anjali's also been willing to join me to answer some questions. So we'll have some videos, then I'm just going to give a pretty brief spiel about anxiety, and then I'm going to invite Anjali up, and she and I together will answer questions. So the goal is to really keep this pretty interactive, and please be brave and ask questions, or if you're just a little bit brave and don't quite feel like owning up to questions, I think there'll be a facility whereby you can ask questions anonymously.
So we'll put up the Slido details on the screen soon, and there's the QR thing as well. And you can use that even if you're in the room. If you don't want to put your hand up, you can use the Slido, or if you're at home, you can send it in, and you can do it with your name or anonymously, whatever suits you. I thought just before we'd watch the videos, I thought we might get Emma to describe anxiety. As I've shared a few times, it just seems to have come up in a couple of the seminars. I'm a bit of a worrier. I'm a bit of the person awake at 3 a.m, equally worried about whether I've taken the bins out and how I'm going to support my teenage daughter through teenage years. And sometimes at 3 a.m, those things are equally weighing on my mind. So I definitely am in the worrier category. But I don't suffer from anxiety, and I think that's quite an important distinction to make and to set the scene for this, that there's anxiety is a different level of mental health from someone who's worried about things, wherever you sit on the spectrum of how much you worry.
So I guess anxiety is the most common mental illness. It affects about 1 person in 7. And I guess there's a continuum. There's a continuum between worrier to really severely affected. And people ask me, well, where's the line? Where's the line? What's what demarks, what divides normal anxiety or a bit of worry from actual clinical anxiety. And I think it's when it stops you from doing the things that you want or need to do, and also when it consistently robs you of your joy. So that's how I think about it. I think about it in terms of people's functioning. Are you able to actually get up and do the things that you need to do or have to do as part of your day? And also, does it make you consistently miserable? If the answer to those two questions are yes, then I think you're suffering from an anxiety disorder rather than the normal worry that perhaps afflicts all of us from time to time. So,
Great.
I hope that answers the question.
It does. I think it does. It's helpful to, some of the advice you'll have will be helpful for anyone, but I think it's helpful to understand that there's a specific...
there's a line.
A line. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So we might watch the first
lovely
video.
Hey, good to meet you all. My name is Jo. I'm part of the 10 a.m. Good Shepherd congregation, and I'm really thankful that I have the opportunity to share my story with you today. I first got my diagnosis for anxiety disorder in 2014, and I guess it came kind of out of the blue in a way. There were different triggers, but after the diagnosis, I started my regular consultations with my psychologist as well as daily medication. While they were helpful, I think to a large extent, I feel like it was the heart-mind surgery that God has been doing that really delved into the deeper and the root issues of my life. I guess it's a different issue for everyone, but for me, I realized how intertwined my emotions, my thinking, and my body are. And while my mind and my thinking might be kind of misfiring, I know that I feel that in my physiology, and my emotions also react. So I kind of feel like, they are all intersecting, and I can't really kind of isolate one part of myself and receive treatment in one part of my life and kind of leave out the other parts. So God really gave me a blank slate through different circumstances. I was unemployed. I didn't function really well, so it just meant that I had nothing to do for months and months on end. And sometimes it meant that during that period, when it was the worst, I could only lie on the floor, couldn't really think straight or make decisions. But it was that time that I felt like God really removed every obstacle in my life and just was working from a blank slate. And in those days, back in 2014, when my anxiety was at its worst, I think a lot of times were spent on the floor with, earbuds in my ears, listening to the Bible, listening to Christian songs, sermons. So really, it was that lifeline of intravenous truth that kept me going, because I think a lot of my time was spent in fighting off lies in my head, whether it be lies about myself, about God, about other people, about reality. It was just this onslaught of lies that I had to fend off almost every moment of every day. So I thought, well, I couldn't do it by myself. I really needed this ongoing line of truth. So I think that's remained true for me. Yeah, after this many years, I think it is these regular doses of truth that kind of just gives me a good reality check. Even now, actually, this year I've had I guess like a flare up of anxiety, and even these recent weeks, I've had to just kind of recalibrate and think, okay, what is God saying about this situation? Is it actually going to happen? What's the worst case scenario? How can I actually keep going? What has God given me to persevere through this? Yeah, there are temptations to mope or to kind of, I guess, distract myself. But I think I'm really thankful that God has given me His Word, His Holy Spirit, supportive husband who can just check in on me and give me the right framework. And I'm, yeah, hopeful that, as I look forward to the day when Jesus comes back, my mind will be slowly rewired to fit into what is reality, but also He is remaking me inside and out so that I can look forward to that day when I won't be broken anymore.
Things I found helpful in managing my anxiety are your checklist.
Summary. Thanks, Joe, so much for sharing your experience, and I guess sharing about how Christian faith can intersect with anxiety. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're cured. It hasn't led to a miracle cure, but it has led to a perspective on anxiety, and I think hopefully an ability to keep going. I think Chris has another video.
Things I found helpful in managing my anxiety are your checklist you'll find on any Anxiety 101 textbook or Facebook scroll or anything. It's nothing magical, but it's consistent, regular practice of those things I've found. So it's getting in exercise, cardio, about 15 minutes at least every day if you can. Going for a walk around the block, getting in some sunlight, getting enough sleep. Paying some attention to the nutrition in your diet, even though when you're anxious, all you want to do is reach for the high fat, high salt, high sugar, comfort foods. Trying to pay attention to your nutrition, because there's an amazing connection between your gut health and your mental health. Mindfulness practice, meditation, yoga are all super beneficial as well. But don't wait to practice them when you're actually in high levels of stress or anxiety. So, I'm in the middle of a panic attack, I better sit down and cross-legged and chant Om for 2 minutes because that'll suddenly make me feel better. It won't. But regularly practicing daily habits, any of those things that resonate with you. For me, it was particularly exercise. It made the biggest difference, and I had the biggest returns, I think, against my anxiety for the amount of time that I've spent on the exercise. It would just keep me going for the rest of the day. And I know when I've suffered from illness or injury and haven't been able to exercise, that will have a seriously negative impact. But if you can't exercise for one of those reasons that I've just mentioned, illness or injury, then try the others, the mindfulness, the meditation. They're incredible, but done steadily and regularly and consistently over time. The question about how my faith, my Christian faith, interacts with my anxiety is an interesting one. It interacts to make me feel ashamed and guilty most of the time, sadly. I think I've prayed probably since the time I was a teenager that I'd have that peace that passes all understanding, Philippians 4:7. And clinical anxiety has got to be the antithesis to that piece, isn't it? And yet, I don't know, maybe God has chosen to do a work in me that might look different to others, and to do it alongside the disorder, the anxiety disorder that I have. I think it can be very hard. Somebody once said to me, the sting in the tail of anxiety is getting anxious about being anxious. So I think putting Christian expectations can compound your anxiety. So I just want to really ask people to be kind to themselves. You don't need to feel like you have to look or be or act a certain way just because you're Christian. That leads on to what can Christian friends do to help somebody who's suffering from anxiety? Consistently practically showing up. People have a meal roster for people who've had babies. They will drop meals around when you've got cancer, but nobody's ever thought to drop around a meal for somebody who's, they've only just got anxiety. And consistency. It's no point giving somebody a call once every 6 months. Work out how regularly you can support somebody. Have different people, have a team of supporters, so that it's not hard work on just one person. But regularly make sure you're checking in, whether it's a text message, a phone call, dropping around with a meal, saying, hey, should we catch up for a walk around the block, so that you're encouraging the person to get out, get some sunlight, get some fresh air, which will do them a remarkable good, but they may not have the wherewithal to be able to do it themselves. One of the things about anxiety is that it doesn't discriminate. You can have the same level of anxiety preparing for a job interview as you can for thinking about what you're going to have for breakfast the next morning. You can have the same level of anxiety sitting for an exam as you can thinking about the load of washing that you've got to put in the laundry. It's not rational, but it causes people to fixate, and it's overwhelming and it drains of energy. So having somebody, a Christian, without judgment, who just regularly and consistently practically shows up for somebody would just do a world of good.
Thanks, Anjali. That was really great. I really liked hearing what you had to say. Now I'm embarrassing you. Particularly like those that talk about consistency, and also about those practical tips. And I think we'll probably talk a bit more about that as the evening goes on. I wanted to just talk briefly about what causes anxiety and perhaps what doesn't. The first thing I'll say is what doesn't cause anxiety. What doesn't cause anxiety is being a crappy Christian. So anxiety is not a marker of, an anxiety disorder is not a marker of lack of faith, dodgy faith, weak will, I don't know, whatever lies you may have kind of heard, or not even heard, but kind of your brain generates, because often people are very self-critical. Anxiety does not mean that you're not a legitimate Christian or that you don't have a legitimate faith. Anxiety is a disorder, and unfortunately it's a disorder that doesn't discriminate in some ways, but in other ways actually anxiety can tend to come on as a layer over the top for people who are already have significant hardship in their life. So hardship and disadvantage for some people can really stack. And the things that cause it, we know that there's a genetic component. So if you come from a family where lots of people have problems with anxiety, you're at higher risk of having problems with anxiety yourself. People's experiences through life, and this includes even their experiences in utero, going on to early life experiences and experiences through their life can really make can really contribute to people's anxiety. And particularly trauma, and particularly experiences like assaults or domestic violence or sexual assaults can particularly cause anxiety for some people. There's also chronic stress can really cause anxiety for some people. So some people live under really difficult circumstances, really stressful circumstances, and the chronic stress perhaps of caring for a loved one who has a serious disability, caring for a partner who has a serious disability, having an ongoing stressful job, living in poverty. These things can cause people to become very anxious, and some medical conditions can also cause anxiety. For our younger people in the world, I do see an increase in anxiety, and I think partly it's about the circumstances in which they're growing up. I'm at the risk of getting a little political here, so just forgive me if I do. I think young people face significant burdens in terms of housing stress and housing affordability, and that is partly contributed to by the inequities related to our taxation system and how income and wealth is distributed in our society. And young people are particularly concerned about climate change, and from a young person's perspective, I kind of feel like people from my generation up have kind of stuffed the environment, and their generation is going to be left to deal with the consequences of that. And that can lead to a real sense of, I guess, kind of hopelessness and worry about the future. So those are some of the factors that I think contribute to anxiety. I think perhaps another is our media cycle, whereby it used to be that if something bad happened in the world, you wouldn't necessarily hear about it, or you wouldn't necessarily hear about every bad thing that happened in the world. Whereas now you do. You do with the media cycle and the news. And you also, through social media, have a lovely comparator of how well everyone else's life is going compared to your life. So, for instance, my Facebook feed this morning was pretty full of people whose kids who are dressed in pretty awesome looking Book Week costumes. I have a personal view on Book Week, which is not positive. And my morning was spent with one of my children having quite a large moment about Book Week, and in the end what we did was I said, okay, just think of it as a day you can wear anything you like and we'll find a book that matches that, whatever you choose to wear.
Good option.
But so, you know, that kind of, when you kind of compare yourself to other people, often you're comparing, you know, your kind of not so great moment with everyone else's kind of marvellous moment, and that can lead to, there can be a bit of a gap. So I think that also can at times contribute to anxiety and self-criticism, where it looks like everyone else in the world has kind of got Book Week or whatever it is sorted, and hey, I haven't really. In terms of what to do about it, I thought Anjali's summary was actually pretty good. Pretty good summary of the things you should do. The first step though I think is to accept that this is a legitimate health problem. It's not being weak. It's not kind of harden up, buttercup. You know, it's something that's actually legitimate. And the second thing I'd say is seek help. You wouldn't necessarily, you know, I wouldn't. So seek help and be honest with people who you think are likely to be supportive. And so that means telling your friends, telling your family, and telling a health professional, oh, hey, I'm struggling. Anjali did a really great job of covering the basics of self-care. So you're kind of not a robot, you're a human, and the laws of human physiology apply to us all. So we all need sleep, we all need exercise, we all need decent food, you know, and actually doing those basics is actually the underpinning of mental well-being, really no matter what disorder. A thing commonly I see for people is making it worse, and in Australian society that means alcohol. So I now know that alcohol and anxiety kind of go together, and anytime I see anyone in clinical practice with a problem with anxiety, the next thing I do is just screen for a problem with alcohol. Because our society is very enthusiastic about alcohol, it's part of our culture. It's also not your friend if you suffer from anxiety. It's probably not really your friend full stop. And the research is actually that probably not drinking at all is the most healthy thing. But certainly for people with anxiety, actually alcohol is not your friend. And the other thing that's not your friend is caffeine. So people in Canberra really love their caffeine, and I struggle with the response that I get when I suggest to people that perhaps a week off caffeine, just to kind of experiment and see how your life feels after that week, and the sort of level of unhappiness that I get when I give that advice. But actually, the switch to decaf can be quite a helpful thing. And I think, like Anjali said, making anxiety management the rhythm of your life. So, if I'm, I'm just going to have to imagine this because this is not part of my life. But let's say I was an excellent sports person, and I needed to, shoot the hoop and get it right every time. You don't practice shooting the hoop when you're in front of a crowd of 100,000. You practice it day after day, when you're not in front of a crowd, so that you get good at it. And so some of the anxiety management strategies that people suggest, like slowing down your breathing or things like that, are things that you should practice daily to reduce your background level of anxiety, and also so that you get kind of awesome at it, so that when you're under pressure you can crack out that strategy and actually do it really well. And too many people kind of only really practice those things when they're super, super anxious. They do it kind of badly because when you're anxious you don't think very well, and then they tell me that it doesn't work, and it doesn't, because you've got to actually practice and get good at it at times when you're not anxious.
Can I pick up on that a little bit? I really like the way you described that, because something Em and I talked about when we were preparing is how, and society is getting better at this, but how we need to normalise mental health, and that sporting analogy is exactly right, that it's a normal thing. As you said, you'd never just go out on Saturday and shoot perfect goals, and you're practicing all the time, but you're also practicing with a coach and with teammates, and you've got so many different strategies before you're under pressure. And we use those sporting analogies in so many things and sermons, but we don't think of it in relation to our mental health very often. But also, I think we're getting better at relating mental health to physical health, and we talk about that later, and especially in the Christian context. But the same, when you said you should seek help, that's what you would do, if somebody said, I've got a cold, or I suspect I've got moles, or I need to have a cancer check, or you would go straight to seeking help, and we're getting better at that, but we're a bit slow to think of mental health in that same way.
Yeah, the response would be absolutely, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for your skin cancer, but also maybe go and get that chopped off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think the same. Yeah, anxiety is more complex than a skin cancer. You can't just chop it off. But that same response about, I'll pray for you and I'll offer you support, and you might need to see someone about that. The other thing that I often see with people who are anxious is that their world shrinks. So that they stop doing more and more and more, and do less and less, and can do less and less. And so my advice is to really try to avoid avoiding things. You need to actually keep getting out and doing things. And the question I often ask people is, well, what's the smallest step you could do? What's the easiest thing you could do? Just to broaden your horizons just a little bit. So it doesn't have to be the big thing, just what's the smallest thing. And when we're supporting with someone with anxiety, your role is to support them to just expand their world, expand their horizons a little bit. And I guess the last thing is to try and reduce your load. Like, sometimes having an anxiety disorder is like having a whole list of homework that you didn't really want to do. It's like, all right, so now for a hobby I get to see the psychologist and do breathing exercises and walk for my mental health, and give up caffeine and eat healthy, and and it's like this list of jobs that you need to kind of do to keep yourself going. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, what am I gonna stop doing to actually create the space so that I can care for myself and look after my health in a way that's actually, that's actually doable, and still have room for some fun in my life. So those are some of my thoughts. It's and I guess I'm pretty keen to bring Anjali up here and maybe open up for some questions.
Sounds good. Yeah, do you want to come up now? We'll swap. I've got questions, but I'll wait.
Anjali, did you want to introduce yourself a little bit first up?
Hi, I'm Anjali and I look like this, not like what you said. Yeah. Everybody was very kind. Is that right? Chris was telling me I had to hold it like out here. Thank you. Do let me know if you can or can't hear me properly. But one of the things I think that I wanted to add to that list was being able to laugh. I think one of the things about anxiety or depression, which they're inextricably linked, is that you forget how to laugh. And I noticed nobody cracked a smile out of kindness when my picture appeared up there, but I laughed inside, and it just felt good because I hadn't done that for a long time. So, yeah. What would you like to know about me? Apart from that I have clinical anxiety.
I guess a little bit about your life and about about what's brought you here.
Yeah, it's incredibly uplifting to see so many people here. Incredibly anxiety-inducing because I thought it was going to be a very private conversation with a couple of people. Didn't know I was going to be live streamed, but it just shows me how many people care about this topic. I think if I was being honest, I've probably had anxiety and depression since childhood. It was never diagnosed. I grew up overseas. It was diagnosed in my early 20s, and I was medicated for about 6 years. That was about 15 years ago, and it was a journey. It was a real journey in which I tried everything that nowadays you have Facebook and social media, you can scroll and you can find 10 things you can do to solve your anxiety. It's never that easy, but there are so many different things you can do, but it's like a shadow for me. I've learned to live with it my whole life, and sometimes I'm doing better than at other times. And in the past year, I've really struggled with some physical health issues, which has really spiked that anxiety again in a way that I thought I'd never return to. And that's been really, really hard to sort of experience, I think, those levels of anxiety that you think, oh, I experienced that a decade ago and I've got all these practices in place and all these supports and I'm fine now. Life can change, and it's okay if that happens. You just, if you're experiencing it for the first time, you'll learn strategies, you'll find support. If you're re-experiencing it, you'll do that as well. Like you'll call on those strategies that you had before. So yeah, on the outside, like I work and I appear to be able to function quite well, but for anyone who has suffered anxiety, you know that it's like you're dragging a millstone around your neck the whole time. So I think kudos to anybody who gets up every day and just makes it out the door. And even if you don't make it out the door, I used to have a calendar years ago and I'd give myself a gold star for getting up and having breakfast, a gold star for getting dressed and putting a wash on. And then there are other times where, I've been at work and I've achieved something and I've ticked off some big projects, or I've, delivered a presentation in front of the CEO. And I'm also the same person that struggles to get my clothes on of a morning. It's okay. You can be both. So sometimes you can have very well-functioning people who really, really struggle.
And it sounds like for you it's not been something that you kind of, like, you had some therapy or you did whatever and then it's like, tick, I'm sorted. it's actually something perhaps more like diabetes or asthma, where you've kind of had to be pretty deliberate about managing it through your life.
Yes, for me personally, exercise was the number one. And that's why I think this physical illness that I've had in the last 12 months has really, I've had to really rethink how I manage my anxiety. But yes, it's like, it's managing any condition. It's being consistent about that, and as I think, okay, so as a perfectionist, as an overachiever, you know, you'd read your 10 things or your 20 things or 50 things, 100 things you can do, and you think to yourself, I've got to do all 100 things, otherwise that's why my anxiety is not better. So I think it's okay to find different things that work for you, and sometimes different things will work at different times. And not, so if I say exercise was my number one, for somebody else it might be something else. I know people who get a great sense of peace from meditating. I for one, am still learning how to do that.
And I guess also there can be this idea of like a formula. It's like, if I do all the right things, then God or the doctor or whoever owes me a cure and I should be sorted. And sometimes it just doesn't work like that. And so, you know, you can do all the right things and still struggle. And I think that's sometimes the hardship of some of these illnesses that, you know, that I don't think we, you know, I don't think as psychiatrists we have all the perfect answers for everybody. And sometimes it's just an ongoing hard struggle for people.
It's, all or something, not all or nothing. So a lot of us can be, I haven't got through my list, or I might as well not get out of bed. There's no point. I'm never going to be able to get through this day, so let's just not even try. I think the smallest, something that you said earlier, Emma, what's the smallest step you can take that's manageable for you today? And congratulate yourself, celebrate yourself for that. The smallest step that you can take, because it's all or something, not all or nothing. So, yeah.
All right. I wonder if I don't know if we've had any questions, or if we want to open up for questions.
We have had one question online from Anonymous, and then we'll kind of open up to questions on the floor. So you can use the QR code or go to slido.com, and there's a number at the top if you want to put a question. So one we've had so far is, can you please share more around supporting people who experience panic attacks as a result of anxiety? So I think it's that when the panic attack occurs, what can we around that do to help?
Yeah. Panic attacks are horrible. So I might just quickly explain what a panic attack is for anyone who hasn't experienced it. So a panic attack is a period of like really, really, really intense anxiety. Might last for 5 or 10 minutes, might last longer, where people get physical sensations. So they might feel like they're going to be sick, they're going to be faint, they're dizzy, or they might feel really sweaty, or like their heart's going really fast. And people usually get thoughts in their mind like, I'm going to die, or I've just got to get out of here. It's this incredibly overwhelming experience that people have, and often people feel like they're actually really physically sick. So we often see people who have their first panic attack often present to the emergency department thinking that they're having like a heart attack, or something dreadful is happening. When someone's having a panic attack, it's a pretty overwhelming experience. Their anxiety is, by definition, pretty much through the roof. So talking a lot to them is not great, and a large audience also not great. So you want 1 or 2 people with clues and everyone else to kind of go away. You know, once you've established that there's no major medical disasters going on here, you know, 1 or 2 people who've got some clues, everyone else kind of go away. What can help is for someone to try to support them to slow down their breathing. So I usually try to get watch with a second hand, so you need someone old school, and try and then, work out how fast they're breathing, and usually they'll be going, usually they'll be breathing really fast, and then try to gradually get it to slow down. So maybe 2 seconds in, 2 seconds out, then 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out, then 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and trying to breathe with them and slow them down. The other thing that can help is things that are cold. So sometimes holding things like, if you can get like an ice cube wrapped in a towel or something like that. Sometimes just having something cold or being out in the cold air can kind of help people, just regulate. Often for people who are having panic attacks, they will often know what helps them. And what's kind of, if you're someone who has panic attacks and knows what helps you, it's probably quite useful to have a card in your purse, because most people who are having panic attacks, their brain's not working, they can't really think and they can't really talk. Then you can crack out your card and give it to the person that's like, this is what I need right now. Because it can be quite individual, what people need, and then that can help them. The real problem, I think, with panic attacks, and this is as someone who doesn't really have them, so people who have panic attacks might have a different opinion, is not actually the panic attacks, but what it stops you doing. So most people remember where they were when they had their first panic attack, and they will never go there again. And then they stop going other places because they're afraid of having panic attacks. And then their world shrinks and they stop doing lots of things because they're afraid of having panic attacks. So my big concern with people who have panic attacks is not actually the panic attack itself, but is the way that it makes people's world shrinks and stops people doing things. Anyway, so that's my take. I don't know, Anjali, whether you have a view or different views?
That's really helpful, Emma. Not everyone's privileged enough to be around a support or somebody who knows you. It can be incredibly helpful if you can either be around somebody that you trust, that you love, that you know has got your best interests at heart, or have a support group on your phone. So if you live alone, or there's a period in your life when you're alone, that can be really helpful. I used to have a friend group when I was really struggling and I was having panic attacks at night, in the middle of the night. And they had little young kids and I couldn't always call on them, but they'd take it in turns, almost like shifts, to check in on me. And they'd, before bedtime, they'd send a message saying, right, Alison's awake till 12 a.m. tonight, and then so-and-so's awake after that if you need to call. So I think, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, having those experiences, but knowing that it will pass. At the time, you can't think rationally, and you do. You think you're going to die, but you won't, and you will get through it.
Hi, Emma. Oh, wow, yeah, to the side. I'm a chiropractor, by the way, and for our patients who have headaches, sometimes we use headache calendars to try to find triggers which might be individual to that person. Can you use that with anxiety? Can you recommend friends or patients make a calendar of how many hours they slept that night, what food they ate that day, how many stresses came into their day? Would that be beneficial retrospectively?
Quite often I get people to track things like particularly exercise, caffeine and alcohol. Foods, generally speaking, for most people aren't triggers, but if we're starting to, if you can't kind of work it out, then that might be. But most people know why they're triggered, because they're really kind of attuned to danger. So it's like, oh yes, every time I drive past that spot where I had the car accident, that's when I have a panic attack. Or whenever I go near my old workplace, or the place where that assault occurred, or the place where I had my first panic attack. That's when I feel anxious. So a lot of people know, I guess, some of those self-care things are about kind of reducing your background level of anxiety so that you don't have that massive spike. Because the reality is, like life is stressful. So, just particularly if you have children, there's sort of random acts of children that can occur that can make your life quite stressful. And probably anyone with toddlers is kind of familiar with the phenomenon, or just things happen, and so you can't, the idea of living a stress-free life, it's actually just not a thing. Like, everyone has things in their life that are stressful and that occur unpredictably. And so it's about kind of hopefully managing your background level of anxiety, so, when the thing happens, you've got a bit of reserve and can actually kind of cope effectively with whatever it is. Yeah. Does that more or less answer the question?
Yeah, because I think you were mentioning that exercise seemed to be. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you were saying that exercise seems to be your major, was that through trial and error? Because, for example, with a bunch of our patients during lockdown, when they were getting more sleep and a lot more walking done, suddenly these people who had almost given up on flexibility or headaches or certain levels of stress, they found other factors in their lives started to improve because they were outside getting fresh air, walking, talking with the family, and sleeping more because they didn't have the commutes. But of course that doesn't carry on now, but they've been aware subsequently that I need to get better quality sleep, I need to get more hours, if possible, and that if I do flip out the next day, maybe it was because I only had 4 hours sleep and sat in front of the computer all day. So joining up the dots, and sometimes it's that retrospective look, and hence doing a calendar of, maybe it's the caffeine, maybe it's the alcohol. Hang on, I always get a Sunday morning headache and I am always stressed on that day as well.
Yeah, there's a really, really solid evidence base about exercise and depression and anxiety. It's just very, very solid. Yeah.
So we're getting a few questions coming in online, so thanks for those. But also, if you're in the room and you want to put your hand up, just let me know and I'll try and come around. So we've got a few. I'll go with this one next. What do you suggest for people that struggle with anxiety in a world where we often are now isolated from others through working from home?
It's really hard. I think working from home's been a really mixed blessing, but for some people I think it's been great, but for some people it's really reduced their connectedness with people at work, and I think you need to seek, people are designed for connection, and you need to seek regular connection, and that might mean, which means that you have to leave your house, which for people with anxiety is actually sometimes a bit of an ask, but you need some kind of regular something or other where you catch up with people, and preferably something that is enjoyable, that you actually like to do. And this is one of the great things about Canberra, is it seems to be full of pro-social people running groups of various kinds. So pretty much whatever you are into in Canberra, there will be some person who is running, a group. So there's car clubs for all the different carring that people might do. There's sports clubs, there's walking clubs, there's special interest clubs, there's book clubs, there's gaming clubs, so whatever it is that floats your boat, you will be able to find your tribe, but you are going to have to get out of your house to do it. And you might need to find a buddy to go with you to support you to do that, because going to things is hard.
Just recently I've been doing a lot of learning about obsessive compulsive disorder, and I've found that a key source of anxiety there is often faith. Questions of, am I saved? Am I okay with God? Am I sinning? And how is that affecting my relationship with God? Do you have any recommendations for how to approach that?
It's really, I think that's really hard, and it's really it's kind of really awful to have something that should be a sense of assurance be kind of twisted in that way by illness. And I guess what I'd say is that all of us have fallen short. The perfect person, the perfect Christian does not exist. And so that's the whole point of Christianity, is that we didn't do it, we can't do it. And so the answer as best you can to those kind of questions is, well, I know I can't. You know, and that's why I'm here, that's why I'm a Christian. For some people, I think putting up some Bible verses around the house can help, that are verses of assurance, but it is really hard. I think those kind of concerns are really hard, and there's not a quick mental formula to kind of neutralise that or to kind of get rid of that. It doesn't work like that. But just knowing that at least as best you can that is the point of Christianity, that we couldn't do it, it hopefully helps to a degree. And certainly, my husband's a minister, and the ministers that I know actually do spend a lot of time with people who have this kind of what I'd call pathological doubt, where they just can't quite believe it. And so seeking support from a minister can often be quite helpful for that. But it's really tough. Yeah.
We also had a question online, what difference should being a Christian make to how you approach anxiety? But I'll roll that up with another question here. What are some helpful or unhelpful responses that a friend or support person can say when one is struggling with anxiety? And are Bible verses or prayer helpful?
So I think prayer is always helpful. And I think reading the Bible is helpful, although sometimes people kind of use Bible verses as a way of self-criticism, or of kind of proving to themselves that they really are kind of a bit of a B-grade kind of Christian. And so if you're reading a Bible verse and you feel like it makes you kind of a little bit, it doesn't give you assurance, then it's perhaps time to talk with someone else. There's two things that I think are really unhelpful. The first is the harden up buttercup kind of, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be feeling like this, just trust God and it'll all go away kind of thing, which I actually think that the church has largely moved away from. That's my hope anyway. I don't hear so much about that anymore. I don't hear people say that about anxiety so much anymore. The second is a little bit more insidious. What people with anxiety need, I think, is a coach rather than a butler. So sometimes we're very kind and we do lots of things for people that perhaps they can do for themselves. So if the person's got a difficult phone call to make, what ideally happens is you sit with them and you coach them through doing it rather than doing it for themselves, unless it's fair dinkum urgent and they really fair dinkum can't do it. So that's my advice. I think Joe's got something to say about that.
I think some of your analogies, Emma, before about having the practice in shooting hoops before we are, before a big audience is helpful in the sense that I think I want my theological foundation well formed before I actually come to that anxiety episode where, yes, I know that everything has been done for me. Yes, because I can't do it. Jesus has finished all that is necessary for salvation in my place. So I don't have to kind of count on my own effort to do it all. So I can lean on that when I do have that episode of anxiety. So the resources of truth are in place. And I
Yeah.
think while that might not be readily accessible, I think for me is that constant input. Even if it's just one line of a song, sometimes I listen to a song on repeat for 50 times, so I can get that one truth. It's like, okay, it takes a while to sink in, but it is sinking in. And I think it is a difference that I think for someone who's not yet a Christian, the sense of reality just gets warped and it doesn't have any pegs to actually pin it down. But for us, the truth pegs are there. They might take a while to sink in, but once I gain a better sense of reality, I can come back to it and shoot some more hoops. And then so that next time I know, oh, okay, all right, I know to go back there and I'm not lost again.
Yes. Chris, Emma, I wonder if you could explain, when we were chatting, you explained a really interesting take on the "do not worry about tomorrow" verse, and I like this. I like what Joe was saying about getting our theology right, not just for people with anxiety, but for all of us, really. But I just really liked the way you explained that verse, and what you were saying is putting up helpful Bible verses and not helpful one. That's possibly not a helpful one to put up, but
About that one that where Jesus says, "Oh, God cares for the sparrows and He cares for you, so don't worry." And sometimes I see people and they're like, "Well, God's told me not to worry, and look, here I am still worrying. So I'm just a fail." I just kind of, God tells me not to worry, but I'm still worrying, and that just means I'm not that great. Whereas I guess I really see that verse not necessarily so much as a critique for us to worrying, because we're human and sometimes we will worry, but I guess there's a real assurance of God's care for us, that no matter what is going on or what's worrying you, to know that we have a God who cares for us, and that assurance of that, rather than kind of measuring yourself up against a standard that means that you should never ever worry about anything, which I don't know anyone who can achieve that. Yeah, so that's I'm not a theologian, so but that's my take on that verse.
We have an 11-year-old grandson who has autism. He's pretty well functioning in most social situations, but from time to time he has panic attacks. Can you give us any advice about the effect of the anxiety on an autistic child?
They go together. Yeah, there's a lot of kids with autism who also struggle with anxiety. And again, I'm not a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I'm certainly not an expert on autism. But what I'd say is, I think for people with autism, sometimes it's like if I were to go to Africa, or I spent some time in Nepal, and I found myself sometimes doing the wrong thing, and it was the wrong thing because basically I was a white person in Nepal and I didn't actually have a clue about what the rules were, what the social rules were. And sometimes I think for a person with autism, they're here in this society full of people who mostly don't have autism, and they don't always know what the rules are. And they find out when they've got it wrong by getting into trouble, or by someone telling them, perhaps in not the kindest way, "Oh, you've got the rules wrong." And that living, just like me, living in another country where, I'd inadvertently get things wrong and do it pretty frequently, that's their experience, and that can kind of make them more anxious. And I guess the things that can help, I guess all the basics of anxiety management that we've talked about, and trying to be as explicit as you can be with instructions and expectations. So, and particularly if you're going into the same setting but the rules have changed. So for instance, if you're going to church, and normally it's okay if you run around church yelling, but today we're going to a funeral at church, and so the rules of church are different today than really being straight up about what the rules of church are or what the rules of the setting are today. But also just knowing that when someone's having a panic attack, their brain really isn't working very well, and so it's just time to try and support them to try and calm down and regulate. And whatever conversation needs to happen about that should happen at a time when when they're actually calm and they're actually able to take it in. But it is, I think that anxiety, it's a real nexus, and it's not easy. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that?
No, thank you. It's been really fascinating hearing everybody's comments. I think I just wanted to say one thing. Thank you, Ryan. Being prepared and having that sort of checklist and having those things prepared in the background, even your theology with your helpful verses, or you've got, you're doing lots of practices. We talked about, trying to get people as prepared as possible to sort of reduce the likelihood of them experiencing an acute anxiety experience. Sometimes I'm a big fixer, doer, checklist person, but it's okay if sometimes you've done everything you can, you've read your passages, you've prayed, you've got all the magnets of Bible verses, and it's still such a struggle. That's okay. So there are people who have very well-meaningly talked about, the Philippians 4:7. And I think I mentioned it in my video. I'd been praying for that since I was a teenager, that I'd have that peace that passes all understanding, but I haven't. I now find that Romans 8, the 26, I think, onwards, that there's nothing that can separate you from the love of God. If neither heaven nor hell or death nor life nor demons nor angels, well, certainly anxiety is not going to separate you from God, is it? So I think for people who are, whatever that acute phase looks like, it could last a few days, weeks, months, it could be a season of life. Having that background and having that preparation of a regular routine, watching what you're eating, drinking, your exercise, keeping your Bible reading going, keeping that social connection is fantastic. But in that acute state, when you're not feeling any of that, like bring all your anxiety to God with prayers and petitions. Well, I haven't been able to pray. Like, you can't pray if you're really anxious. That's okay, because God still loves you, and I think that's just. If that's the last thing that I leave you with, that's what I'd like people to remember.
We've got plenty more questions. So next one we've got is, how do you deal with possible judgment from workplaces, churchy people and others who just have no idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think for whatever disability people have, and particularly for invisible disabilities, and I think about autism or I think about anxiety, there will be the clueless people. The first thing is probably to try and avoid them. Find the people who aren't clueless, because you just can't educate the world. Like, some people are just don't get it, or some people perhaps are having their own struggles, and that means that their vision is narrowed and it's hard for them to see what's happening for other people. So I guess my first advice would be to graciously avoid, if you can, and try not to expose yourself. Particularly if you're a wee bit raw. If you're having a bit of a struggle, not necessarily to expose yourself to people who perhaps aren't kind. If you're feeling less raw and a little bit more kind of robust, you might be in a position to engage with that. But for some people, like, you're just never going to get anywhere, and maybe it's just your time and energy's best spent elsewhere. And sometimes you don't have to tell everyone everything either. So, if you've got a really, really judgy boss and you're going to see your psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever, you can say, oh, I've just got a healthcare appointment. And they don't need to know if you're having your toenails clipped or, or what you're going for. So, you know, sometimes just being a bit light on the details is quite useful, and sometimes having some lines, some researched lines. So if you know that you've got a relative who's going to say something kind of dumb, then having some lines that will either just change the subject, so you know that if you get them onto the footy, then they'll talk about that, and you won't have to listen to their views on how anxiety doesn't exist, or, you know, back in my day we didn't have mental illness or whatever. That can be a good strategy, but you don't have to win every war, I guess, is what I'd say. I don't know if that's. I don't know. Have you dealt with the clueless?
Yeah, quite a bit. I think where you can avoid, that's good. Sometimes you can't. But I want to pick up on something you said earlier today, which was if you can, don't let that fear of a bad experience drive you into further avoidance. So I remember the first time I told a boss that I had depression, anxiety that was particularly high. I was on medications that were making it pretty hard to function earlier in the day, and I asked for some adjustments, whether I'd be able to stay back later and get my work done. And she listened at the time. And then she put me the following week on duties where I was customer facing, and I had to be there early in the morning, so she set me up to fail, and 2 weeks later I'd lost the job. And I think that experience scarred me for more than a decade, and I ended up, you can pretend well to yourself to a certain extent and to others, but sometimes you won't pick it. You might have a setback. There'll be things in life that will set you back, and you really do just need a little bit of that understanding and awareness. And I guess I just want to encourage people that not all bosses are the same, and there's certainly a lot more awareness. And there are regulations in place that you can't, that supervisors will take in and need to take into account to accommodate people. Having said that, invisible illnesses and things like mental illnesses, it's a really difficult one, because you've got to choose. You know, when you fill in these forms, when you start a new role, whether you want to characterize yourself as having a disability, that's whether your illness is going to impact your day-to-day role the majority of the time. And some people may choose to do that, some people may not. I struggle because in my particular line of work, there's a real expectation, and other people who work in law will probably attest to this. There's a real expectation to present a certain front, and that can exacerbate that anxiety if you're pretending to yourself and others. If you're able to have that conversation with a trusted supervisor, do that. I've had team members when I've supervised teams who've said that up front, and it's been such a joy to actually say to them, thank you for your bravery, and I know exactly what you're going through, and I'm going to support you through this. So you never know, you might actually have a boss who's like that. You won't always know until you've actually been brave enough to start the conversation.
And I mean, I guess for me, the bottom line is 1 in 5 Australians have will experience a mental illness. So it's kind of like, you're not a unicorn. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are other people in your workplace who will have these same issues or similar issues, and you know, currently we've got major workforce shortages. It's in your employer's best interest to support you, because they need you. There's not like there's a queue of people lining up to take your job. So, I mean, it's probably now's a good time to seek those adjustments, I think, because we really need people at work.
I found your definition about anxiety quite interesting, about, I think, undermining joy. I like to think of myself as quite a joyful person, and when I tried to help people in the past, I used to think I could like inject joy in their lives. Didn't really work. But like, I seem to, in the Bible at least, see like a correlation between joy and anxiety. Like, Paul seemed to, he suffered through so much, was so anxious about the church, but he also seemed to be the most joyful person. He really emphasized that, especially in Philippians. And so I guess my question is, especially for Anjali and Joe, is in your experience going through what you have gone through, like, how would you define joy? Like, what is joy? It's not simply happiness, is it?
I'm glad you've got that one.
Certainly happy Joe might have more to share on this, because I think from Joe's video, Joe, I love the way you shared about how you found solace. Joy may not be happiness, like ha-ha happiness, but a sort of a contentment almost in resting in God's promises. Now that'll be some people's experience, it wasn't mine. For me, when my anxiety is worst, it's when I feel the most distant from God. So everybody's experience might be different, but I think it's that contentment perhaps. You know that you're loved even if you don't feel it. You're content even if you don't feel happy. Just somehow trying to maybe just separate your feeling at the time, that temporal experience, from what you know to be true.
It's really hard to answer briefly, hey Alex. I think a passage you were talking about, Anjali, from Romans 8, I wonder whether the association that Paul makes between joy and anxiety can be brought into joy and suffering in general, that the world seeks to rob us of our joy in Jesus. And all those things, the examples that he gives, no height nor depth, nothing in all creation can separate us from our love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And I think anxiety might be on that list. And it is when all those things are taken away and what is left is that bare rock of joy where hey, that's unshakable. And sometimes the bare rock might be covered over by gravel, weeds, and it might take time to actually see through that. But I wonder whether, the more we suffer, the more we actually see that rock and go, that can withstand tests. Nothing's going to take that away. I know that I can see that on a rainy day, I can see that on a hard day, and it's still there. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think that's my own experience, yeah.
I might add something on this. I've got no particular qualification to comment here, but although I did spend some time a while back looking at the concept of joy in the scriptures. And one thing that, C.S. Lewis said it very well when he titled a book of his Surprised by Joy. Joy is not something we earn or expect or demand. It's something that comes to us when we totally don't expect it, and there is something wonderfully liberating about not being able to control what we get and getting something good. And it's perhaps at the darkest points of our lives where we are open to being surprised in a way that we're not when we think we're in control. So, yeah.
We've got a couple more questions online and might have time for one more from the floor. So this next one, thinking about the link between anxieties and fears, is it a good approach to challenge or confront your anxieties, or is it better to avoid triggering them?
I think you need to try and confront them because your world shrinks. But I guess confronting sounds like, I don't know, I'm scared of public speaking, so I'll go and speak in front of the MCG. But maybe it needs to be, I'm scared of public speaking, so I'll say a few words for the colleague who's leaving in front of 10 people. So I think it's confront, but trying to confront in really small, achievable steps. Because what you find is the more you avoid, and it used to be that you couldn't go to the Canberra Centre, and now you can't go to the local IGA, and I just see people's worlds shrink.
One more question online. This one's a bit more specific. For Emma, is being in a constant state of fight or flight and highly sensitive to noise defined as anxiety, even if you don't have trouble functioning generally?
I sound pretty miserable, so yes. I mean, it's hard from two sentences to make a diagnosis. But if you're feeling pretty miserable and you're asking yourself the question, is this anxiety and should I do something about it? The answer is probably you should go and have the bare minimum, go and have a chat with your GP about what you're experiencing, because that doesn't sound great.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Andrew and Joe as well. Can we talk very quickly about medication and the importance of medication in addressing anxiety, and what's been the lived experience of being on it in terms of side effects?
So medication does have an evidence base, and for some people medication's really good. For some people medication's not so good. So it's kind of about, for most people need to do the basics of, looking after themselves, laying off the caffeine, doing some exercise, laying off the alcohol, all those sorts of things. Usually seeing a psychologist, and then medication for some people is really helpful. There's quite a large range of medications, and for some people they're really well tolerated, and for some people they're really not. We don't. I think across psychiatry we don't have, the perfect medication doesn't exist. So for some people medication's absolutely life-changing, and for some people it's it's just not that great. So it's a really mixed bag for people.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can say, having been on medications for many years and also lived very well for many years without medication, is that you need to have a holistic approach, and that there's a time and a place. So medications in isolation, and you're not having that social connection, you're not looking after your physical health, you're not addressing other issues, other stresses, other long-term lived traumas, past, they all need to be addressed, but not all at once. So sometimes medication might just give you that little lift that will give you the ability to then start addressing some of the other things. However, it can tend, and certainly if you're on it for year after year after year, and it's very individual, and certainly I'm no doctor and I never say to somebody, come off your meds. Though for myself, I was on a cocktail of medications that caused a series of side effects, and at one point, there's this little voice inside me that said, approach your GP, your psychiatrist and your therapist and tell them you want to wean off these medications. And all of them said, no, don't be ridiculous. But I did, and it was the best thing I did. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place, and there wasn't a place for medication. I'm on medications now. But it's got to be in conjunction with other things, with the aim of eventually trying to lower them if you can. There are some people who have very low doses and are on maintenance dose for years successfully, so it's very individual. But if you know that you're struggling with side effects, as I was, then you might be looking to wean off them in a very safe way under the guidance of your doctors, with lots of other supports in place. If you don't have those other supports in place, then you need to be very, very thoughtful about coming off meds, and never come off them suddenly. Yeah.
No more questions?
mucking up the live stream, am I? It's bad if I stand here. Is my head chopped off? Sorry, everyone at home, if you can't see my my head. There's two things. No, you stay there. Two things. I wanted to thank Anjali and Joe so much for being so brave and for sharing so honestly with us. And hopefully some of us here that have been clueless are a little less clueless, thanks to your bravery and your sharing. And I'm sure if we've got questions, I'm sure they wouldn't mind that you were too shy to ask. I'm sure they wouldn't mind answering a few at the end or at church. The other two things I wanted to finish is one, I just wanted to go back to what Anjali was saying on her video about practical help. I found that really helpful, that if I had a friend who was suffering cancer, I am dropping meals in frequently. Do I take that same approach to someone who's struggling with these sorts of mental health issues, or at least ask them what would be most helpful? What is some practical help that I could do? And maybe it's joining a group that I wouldn't normally, one of Canberra's many social community groups that Emma was saying, joining that group with them, being their support person and going, I don't know, I'd like to go ballroom dancing or whatever it is that they would like to do. Maybe there's some really practical things that we can be doing to support people, and starting with asking them the same as we would ask someone who's sick or had a new baby, how can I help the most this week? And doing that regularly, checking in, not once every 6 months. And the final thing that I wanted to leave with us is a question that Emma and I were tossing around, which is, how is it best for us to pray for our friends with a mental illness? And it's, I think, the same sort of struggle I have sometimes with how to pray for somebody with cancer. You know, do you pray for healing? We want healing. What happens when they're not healed? How can we best pray? And what is the right way to do that? And Emma said a helpful thing to me, but I'll also see if Joe or Anjali have anything helpful. But Emma said it's never wrong to pray for people's suffering to be relieved. I thought that was an excellent way to put it. And that's an excellent thing that we can pray for that relief from suffering. And that applies to many circumstances when I'm not quite sure what to pray. So that's very, very helpful for me, a takeaway. But I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add that you found helpful that people pray, that's specific, or maybe the opposite to what's been particularly unhelpful that people have prayed.
I think there's no magic words that anybody needs to pray. I think it's being there and knowing that you've got that support. So absolutely praying for relief and release from that suffering. The mental anguish, it doesn't rival physical sickness or pain. It's just unseen and it's invisible. But relief from that and release from that is wonderful, to have somebody pray for you for that. But while you're waiting, or while that person continues to suffer, just say to them, I'm continuing to pray for you, but I'm also praying that God will grant you the strength and the grace to get through each day, each minute of each day. So it's praying for relief, but also the strength that God in His mercy will, and His will be done, and in His mercy He knows what is best. And for me, and that's really hard when you don't see that immediate healing. You can really question yourself, the power of, as we've talked about, am I not a good enough Christian, or are the prayers of my friends not powerful enough? And it's not that. Somebody once said to me, God doesn't choose everybody to suffer. There's only certain people that He might choose to allow certain things to happen so that you can be an encouragement and an example to others. I'm still trying to get my head around that. But but in a sense, it is also really encouraging. Like, if you have suffered with something for a long time and you know that you are being an example, or that your example helps somebody else, that in and of itself can be an encouragement. So I think it's the prayer. It's not, there's no magic words. It can be just praying with that person what they would need at that time, what they'd like you to pray for. And if they don't have the words, that's okay. Just pray whatever. Just ask the Spirit to help you to pray at that time.
Well, I might just close in prayer, and then we can wrap up. And as I said, I'm sure that Emma and Anjali and Joe are happy to answer questions, or others of you may want to share things with the people around you as well. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the things that you are teaching us as people and a church and as a community. And thank you for how far we've come with this issue. Thank you for the people's bravery, like Anjali and Joe and others who speak up and share their stories. Father God, thank you for the gifts you've given them. I pray that you would help all of us to wrestle with our mental state and to bring that before you. I pray that you would help us all to be honest about the shortfall, the shortcomings in our own life and the way we struggle with these issues and the times where we don't respond as well as we could with ourselves, as we've learnt tonight, to be kind with ourselves and to be kind with those around us. Father God, we pray that you would relieve the suffering of those in our church who are suffering with a mental illness. And we pray particularly that you would help all of us be aware of this around us, have eyes that are looking and ears that are listening, and a willingness to help and to respond to the needs we see around us. And as Anjali said, we pray, Lord, that you would give us the words and the strength and the things we need to get through each day with your grace and your mercy leading us through each day. In Jesus' name, amen. Great. Well, thanks again for coming out, and thanks online for watching, and thank you for those excellent questions. And thanks to Emma as well for her preparation and her willingness to share her expertise with us this evening. And thanks again to Anjali and Joe. Okay, thanks everyone.